My name is Pr0lly, and I'm the coach of H2k. Is that as detailed as you need it?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's good. So going into this group that you've been drawn into with Edward Gaming and SK Telecom and Bangkok Titans, what was your mentality approaching Worlds? How did your team feel?
It was a bit of shock, I guess. Going into Worlds, we knew taking first seed would probably be, unrealistic, but shooting for second seed was definitely something we wanted to do. And once we saw we were in a group with two world championship mid laners winning championship titles, it seemed just really like we pulled the short straw really hard. And then it became which one of the two seems the most exploitable with our play style. What's the one that we can focus on to get our win and potentially pull a tiebreaker and shoot for that second spot. So initially it was a little bit of, I guess, depression in a way, because it was like, this is a bit unlucky, but there was a lot of I guess, ease of mind, because it did come down to, regardless of how we do, we are playing two extremely hard opponents. So win or lose, it's not going to be like a disgrace.
I mean, and not just the teams, right? The coaches going into this group were a bit intimidating with their track records, kkoma and Aaron. Have you been able to learn anything from facing them, or how they seem to be approaching this tournament?
I haven't gotten to get too much from kkoma yet. The most I know is he's a better coach than me. That's words from Ryu, so that's a good motivation for me, because he's a pretty honest person and he's nice. So that's like the nicest way he could put it. So I do watch a lot of their pick and ban and the things they change in between games, because I assume part of that's going to be player wise, and I know his job is going to be mostly fixing things like that. So what he chooses to fix, I'll credit part of that to players and part of that to him. So focusing on that is pretty important. Aaron, mostly I just look at his pick ban, because some of the things don't really make sense when I initially look at it. But I can always find the silver lining of why he's doing the things he is. So then it's up to me to kind of balance, is this enough reason to be picking these champions or picking in this order? And sometimes it just leaves a 50-50 gap where I don't have enough information to know if it's good or bad. And I'm just sitting there looking at both sides. So it's really important to look at them, because it makes me think and make the decision of what is actually good and bad, instead of just looking at it as that's the way you should be, coaching or doing pick and ban.
Speaking of coaching and pick and ban and different approaches to it, and using your own assessment, there's obviously been a debate in the community about how much control a coach should have, how much it should be a collaborative experience with the players. Could you briefly describe your relationship between yourself and your players?
Most of the time, champion pool is like a 50-50 between the player's passion for the champion and actual results. I know a good example was Braum and Alistar were definitely what Kasing really didn't like playing. When we first had him on the team, that was even a champion he said he would never play. So convincing him to play that was really, I would have to show VODs or examples of how effective it was, because he didn't have any of the player passion to learn the champion. And then as it went from there, he'd pick up the passion, and then it became an easy champion to use. Other examples would be for Ryu playing Kassadin on last playoff patch. We hadn't practiced it at all, and it was one of those kind of gambits where it could go really bad or really good. And judging from his playstyle, I knew the champion would fit well. And when he started speaking about picking Kassadin, there wasn't any hesitation, I guess, with the way he wanted it. He was really confident saying, I wanted this. So I could tell he had the passion to play this kind of champion, and he would do well, regardless of the practice results that we didn't have for it. So it's really just striking a balance between what the players want and if it's a want that they have or a passion to play the champion. Because there are times where they want to pick champions that actually wouldn't be good for the team comp. They just wanted to play it out of feeling like they just like it, and it wouldn't fit. So it's really on the coach, I think, a lot to do with what to be picking, because for a while it's really like ambiguous, like who to blame for pick and ban. Like, do you blame the coach? Do you blame the players? And I think I've pretty much come to the conclusion that you have to blame the coach, because it really is up to him to either like swat away the bad ideas or bad feelings for these picks and really like navigate the players to think correctly or to pick the one that will work the best kind of thing, or convince them, I guess. Ryu is probably the best example because he was kind of the cornerstone of me learning that you really do need to know your players and what their strengths are and then cater to that. Because for the longest time, Azir, Victor were such meta staple picks. They were like, incredibly strong. And Azir really just didn't fit Ryu's style at all. And I remember pushing it for a really long time, like to get him to play it, to get him to practice it. And the more and more games we saw of Azir, like the more examples I had that it was the right pick to be learning. But knowing Ryu, like we'd play scrims with Azir and they would go like mediocre, and then we'd play scrims with him playing an assassin and he would be able to solo carry games. Like his shot calling would change when he's playing assassins. So I really started to understand, like, although this champion is incredibly strong, it doesn't fit the playstyle of my player, and it started becoming, a bad habit for me to just push meta on my players instead of pushing what works for them really well. And after I kind of realized that with mid lane, because, I'm a mid player, so it was really easy for me to learn that, like, importance. And that kind of translated to, bot lane and top lane, when I needed like steer them away from the meta and towards more picks that suit them. And for Kasing, he really likes playing the peel supports, but putting him on engage, he like makes all the plays when he gets to play engage. So that was something, after I learned with Ryu, I was able to learn with Kasing that although he really likes playing these like, John and Nami kind of champions, he's going to be able to influence the game a lot more on someone who can just like run their face in there or flash. So it was kind of like a hard argument that I had to drive with my players, where I'm just like, you have to show me that you can play these peel champions the same level as your engaged, because you just have a natural ability to play these engaged champions, and it's going to hurt our team by taking this away. So once you learn that, then you have to go into the harder part of convincing them that it is right for them.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about lane swapping, because I know that H2k for a while has been known kind of for the lane swaps. This tournament, we've had some issues where it feels like Chinese teams or teams in general that seem to be behind in the meta are getting behind by making the wrong decisions in lane swaps. Could you maybe describe what you feel is like the lane swap meta right now?
I honestly feel like no team has played the lane swap correctly yet. I think KT and Q and Scrims have shown that they know the most, but even on stage, they don't do the 2v1s that they've done in Scrims. So they still, I don't know if for them the lane swaps are they make a different decision in game, or if they're not comfortable pulling off the strategy. I really can't explain the 2v1 meta in my mind yet because it hasn't been pulled off yet. But I think the biggest mistake why you don't see the effective 2v1s yet are because in every situation there's always like 2 plays max that you can make, and it normally revolves around you either defreeze the lane or you dive. And in almost every game at Worlds so far, the third option of do nothing has always happened, where neither team really goes for the defreeze or neither team goes for the dive, and they kind of go in the middle where they like pull off some weird invade that doesn't get them anything, and the other teams don't react. So we haven't gotten any of our lane swaps in, so we haven't been able to show it. But I think the 2v1 meta now really depends on those 2 plays only, is you dive or defreeze. And you have 3 moving pieces at all times between like the top jungler and support. And the AD carry is just kind of like you play around that. And It's really fun. The 2v1s are really fun. And I think right now the Europeans play it the best. And then I think KT and Q are the best Korean teams that have done it so far. And then I think everyone else is not lost, but if the other team knows what they're doing, they're always going to punish. And I think right now a lot of the 2v1s are just not used as much in scrims, so they don't see where it fails. So when it happens on stage, they get away with it, and they don't understand that they're actually making a big mistake.
Speaking of weird invades, I was interviewing Mako after Edward Gaming's game against you, and I asked him about the early game, and he said, they'd done a lot of scouting and they expected the H2k invade. Hearing something like that, how does that affect you going forward? Do you feel like, okay, we need to stick with what we know and just do it better? Or do you feel like we need to change this up because they know what we're going to do?
Yeah, that was actually a big mind game. We had been showing the same level 1 for a while, and we did it against SKT. So it became, they know what we do, and they either call us on what we do or they expect us to be smart enough to know that. So I was putting money on that they respected us enough to know that we figured out a new one, but they didn't, and they thought we would just be dumb and do the same one. So I was like, all right, we're going to out-mind game them and do the exact same thing and pretend like we don't know we're doing the same thing. And they ended up catching us during that, and that was pretty bad. But I think that also showed another weakness of our level 1s is we normally play really overly aggressive level 1s, thinking that just by like champion matchups, we have the stronger level 1, so we can do anything, when in reality it still has to be played correctly. And in that example, we grouped up as 4 and we didn't check any bushes with any of our abilities. So we ended up having a face check, and the 2v1, or the level 1 started with, I think something around like 400 damage or 500 damage done without us returning any. So regardless of how good our champions were, we just lost straight out because we got complacent with the fact that we did have a better level 1. So the strategy kind of went out the window there. But that made it good for, moving forward. I wish that had happened in a scrim though, so we could have learned it that way, but we had to learn it the really hard way and learn on stage.
So given that maybe you lost a lot in that level 1, do you feel like that's probably the most glaring mistake that you've made, and maybe in round 2 you can come up with a good way to defeat Edward Gaming, or was it just a lot of mistakes and it's really hard to work on?
It is a lot of mistakes, mostly revolving around level 1s, because in scrims, yeah, most teams are either lazy or over-respectful, and we get away with every level 1. So we get whatever lane swaps we want when we want them or when we don't want them. So playing against SKT and EDG, we matched both games like unintentionally because our level 1s didn't give us anything like they did in scrims. So that was probably the biggest mistake, because after that, we're basically playing a game we've never played before. We're playing these standard lanes when we're picking purely for the 2v1, and our strats the week before are all 2v1, and then we don't land it. So now we're going back and figuring out how to play when things do go wrong, like when we don't get this 2v1. And that's kind of this learning process this last week, is fixing all of these, standard mistakes and getting better at punishing the correct things. Similar to the 2v1, where I'm saying there's 2 plays, the defreeze or the dive. During standard is actually a pretty similar school of thought, where you can freeze the lane and gank it, or you can push and dive and find the jungler. And that's something that we're kind of leaning towards for if things go terribly and we have to lane standard. We're always making these 2 plays instead of the third, which is, suboptimal, some kind of like warding pattern that some teams do.
Okay. And going into this week, you place BKT, EDG, and SKT again. Could you briefly describe, having facing each of them, what you think, and probably studied them extensively, what you think their play style is?
SKT is probably, not a surprise that it's very mid-focused. Jungler and support ward the hell out of mid, and it kind of gives Faker the free reign to be playing extremely disrespectful. So when they pick for him and they get good matchups for him, and then they ward like this, it kind of makes the enemy mid laner impossible to play correctly against, because he has, way more information than you do. So I think SKT's early and mid is really mid focused, and always making sure Faker has like the vision to be doing his playstyle, which I think that's a good example of what kkOma's coaching probably has done, is focused them to make sure Faker plays his style that he wants. And after they get any kind of mid lane push, mid lane priority, mid lane vision, they always extend that into side lanes. And they actually play a pretty predictable game plan. Like, you know where they're going to go, but the way they do it is almost uncounterable if you're behind. So a lot of the time you'll see them play and you go, all right, they're going to push mid right now and then they're going to go invade blue. And then you're the team that they're doing it to, and you know they're doing it, but you have no answer to it. The most you can do is run to the other side. But even at that point, they're ahead of you on the play. They're already in your blue side before you decide to go to theirs. So the way they play is really uncounterable. I think the only way to really deal with them is to gain an early lead and be ahead of their plays. Because I think the second they start playing their style, it's really, risk averse. They don't really make that many risky plays, and it's really, it's a step-by-step process that you can see it happening, but you're always behind on the play and you just have to let it happen or try to really outplay a team fight. EDG, I don't know. EDG is a lot harder, in my opinion. I think reading them as a team, I think the only conclusion I've come to is we have to exploit the jungle pool and the top lane matchup. I think that's the only thing that they lack. I think between their mid and bot, and if their jungler's on a comfort champion, I think those are, pretty uncounterable positions. Like, you can't really hypothetically figure out a way to beat it other than outplaying it in a way. So I think the bot side of the map is EDG's strongest point, and if their jungler gets the right jungle, then their jungler's going to do everything on the bot side of the map, and you can't really deal with that kind of jungle support like synergy that they've built together.
Any thoughts on Bangkok Titans? Maybe what you think they could easily improve on?
I think they're actually pretty solid overall. They're similar to Pain in the sense that they don't know all the mistakes yet. And watching our game, we made a few errors that other teams would know were errors and go all in. I guess the biggest example is the 2v1s I was talking about earlier. Is if you don't know that they're messing up by doing this, you're not going to punish it. So it looks like they're doing okay, they're getting away with it. But in reality, you're the one making the mistake by not punishing it. And now they're getting away with murder. I think that's kind of what BKT's problem is right now, is in that game, we actually had a lot of opportunities for them to win, but they just didn't take advantage of our mistakes. And it is a bit hard to notice until you kind of do them yourself and have someone else beat you at them. So that's something that we learn a lot of, because we get beaten all the time in scrims. So we're getting a lot better at noticing mistakes and being able to punish them when other teams do them. But that's why I would say SKT is hard to beat, is because we can't see what their mistakes are yet. And EDG's bot side of the map, we don't know what their mistakes are yet. So we don't really have plays when they do make mistakes.
So before I let you go, we've noted, at least answered part of the question, in that you're bad at predictions. But what are your strengths and weaknesses as a coach?
I'd say a big part of my weakness is I get really stubborn with things. I think a lot of League of Legends can be proved through results or mathematics. And if there's neither, I have a really hard time to go with the gut feeling of someone. I know that kind of contradicts the whole pick and ban process that I go through. But in general, I am really result-based and math-based. So I know when arguments come up about plays and things like that, a lot of it comes down to I'm going to watch this play 5 times and figure out the exact gold and XP difference than your play, and then we'll see which is right. So sometimes that can cause a schism between the team because things get really tense when two people argue about something that should be like slept on or is not too big of a deal. And I think the second weakness I have is I'm not the best at controlling emotions or I guess coaching, that kind of thing. I think I can do mine pretty well, but teaching that to someone else is really foreign to me. So helping my players out with like tilting or becoming negative in game is really hard to explain a process of eliminating that from themselves. So that's something that I'm always looking to improve on is, yeah, just kind of emotional control is something I'm pretty bad at. I would say my strengths are kind of obsession to detail kind of thing. I think I spend a lot of time like overanalyzing a lot of things, and that leads to a lot of like healthy discussions. Double-edged sword of that is I end up spending a lot of my time speaking, and it kind of takes away from the player's chance to, critically think about something because I'm going off on how I thought about it. And then I'll arrive at an answer when in reality I could have paused and let them come at the answer. So I guess patience. We'll add that to my weakness, patience. But yeah, other than like attention to detail and the fact that I was a player, so I actually have a pretty good idea of what they're feeling or what they would like to see. And then, yeah, I don't know if I said it in another way, but I think I probably have one of the better strategic minds for this game in terms of coaching. I think a lot of coaches either rely on their team to figure out the next meta or the next 2v1. And a lot of my time is spent to try to figure out those plays myself and then teach them. And then their job is to learn the execution. My players really don't focus on figuring out plays. That's normally what I do. And then I show them and they decide if it's good or bad or could be improved kind of thing.